So this is Ephesians 2, the reading for February 3rd. And first, if you've been doing the reading plan since the new year, congratulations. You are 1/12 of the way through the New Testament. That's like 8%. That's good. Good luck with the rest of the year. Next, Ephesians 2 is one of the dearest chapters in Scripture to my heart. When I was little, I was part of a group that would memorize Scripture called Awana. And one of the earliest Scriptures we memorized was from Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9. For it is by grace you've been saved through faith, and that this is not of yourself, it is the gift of God, not of works, so no one can boast. And this is in some sense Paul's mission statement. We saw that with Galatians, and we see that in Ephesians. Paul in Ephesians 2 begins by laying out the direness of our situation, being under the rule of sin. And he talks about the ruler of the power of the air, at least that's my translation, the NRSV. And while this pretty clearly is referring to Satan, or the evil one, or the devil, why would he refer to the evil one as the ruler of the power of the air? That seems a little odd. One idea, there's a couple ideas here, and one idea is that air is transient. It moves from place to place. It's not something that you can count on. And in the same way, Satan is transient. Evil is transient. It's not something that you can count on. It's not something that has grounding. Another explanation that some commentators suggest is that Satan, being the prince of the power of the air, or the ruler of the power of the air, refers to the fact that just as the air surrounds all of us and we all breathe in air, so too every human being that has the breath of life in them has sin in them. That Satan has taken over even everybody and everything that breathes. And that's an interesting idea. It's an interesting idea that Christ, by dying, has redeemed even the air we breathe. I'm partial to that. I think that that's a neat concept. It helps us remember that the water we swim in is colored by sin, and so there are going to be some things that we won't notice as sin just because that's the norm. We've become desensitized to it. And then Paul continues, and he continues in verse 4, I believe, with the two most beautiful words in the English language, but God. That we have such a dire situation, but God. That God saw fit to intercede for us. And this is such good news. God did something about it and made us alive when we were spiritually dead. God didn't have to do that. This is God was fully in the right here, that God laid out expectations and we did not fulfill those expectations. But then God decided that he wanted reconciliation, but God. If someone asks you when you were saved or when you began believing in Jesus Christ or when you accepted Christ into your heart, one answer you can always give is that it happened at Golgotha, when Jesus died for me, because that's when God saved all who will be saved. That there's a sense in which your salvation was secure before you were even born, because God did something about it, because it's by grace that you're saved. Jesus' salvation makes us alive to pursue the good works that God laid out ahead of time for us to do. This is what verse 10 means. Some translations translate a word in verse 10 as, we are God's workmanship. Others use the word masterpiece, and I love that because I think it gets at the depth of God's love for us in Jesus Christ. That we're not just something that God threw together, we have deep value to God. We are God's masterpiece. Not only does it remind us of our value, but it's a faithful translation that gets at some of the nuances that workmanship or craftsmanship or we are who God has made us doesn't quite get at. So in the second chunk of this chapter, on behalf of Jesus, Paul insists Jews and Gentiles are no longer divided, but they're unified in Christ. In the death of Christ, there was the veil between the most holy place and the rest of the world that was torn from top to bottom. And that's the idea that Paul's getting at here, that there's no longer this dividing wall between those who can access God and those who can't. But we're all able to access God, that dividing wall has been torn down and that bridges have been built because God has reconciled all people in Jesus Christ. Even though Gentiles were once considered strangers and aliens as far as God was concerned, Jesus claimed Jews and Gentiles alike for God's people. One theologian says that when Jesus died on the cross and stretched out his arms, there was no square inch in all creation that Jesus did not claim as his own. Jesus looked at all creation and said, mine, lovingly. And Paul's not anti-Jew or anti-law here. These things, he's careful to say, formed the foundation of the house on which Christ has built in Gentiles. This household of God was not possible without the prophets and the apostles and the law and Israel. So far from blaspheming Israel or discounting Israel, Paul necessitates Israel. I think that's all for Ephesians chapter 2. Tomorrow, February 4th, we'll look at Ephesians chapter 3. May God bless you in your reading of Scripture.